Good evening, friends, and welcome to Ghastly Manor. I've been expecting you. I know you are here seeking to enter the vault and to explore the gruesome collection of stories contained within. But beware, my friends, these stories are of a most disturbing nature. Now come in from the storm before you catch your death, and follow me to the vault. If you would please walk this way. Do you ever have that looming feeling that there's something off about your house, your room, or perhaps yourself? As a child, I used to think that my house was haunted. There were many times I had strange experiences, and I feel like this is probably the only place I can go to share them without being looked at as crazy. My concern is that by sharing these, it will only bring on more issues. I have tried researching these strange happenings, but it only seems to make me more terrified. My hope is that by getting it out, it can serve as some kind of therapy. I just hope it doesn't make them mad. When I was about 7 years old, my mom got remarried and we moved into my stepfather's house shortly thereafter. Coming from a small apartment in town to a huge house out in the woods was scary in itself. It was in a neighborhood, but it was very secluded as the last house on a dead-end street. The house was gigantic. Back in the early 1900s, it served as a bar and hotel. Even to this day, if you look under the carpet in the basement, you can see the original black and white tiles of the bar floor. The basement had been redone, adding a living room, bathroom, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. This is where we lived. The second floor was reserved for my stepfather's mother, and his brother lived on the 3rd floor. My room was huge, much larger than my previous room in the apartment. The problem was the closet. Instead of a typical closet in the corner with a door, it ran the entire length of the room, with mirrored doors on its tracks. It was great to have all that storage space for my clothes and toys and such, but it made facing that side of the room at night the scariest thing ever. This was the first place I saw them. Things had been going well the first few weeks of living there. I quickly learned to always face away from the closet when I slept. My body betrayed me one night, and must have rolled over while I slept. I was awoke by something. I'm not sure what, perhaps a noise or just a feeling of something staring at me. I opened my eyes. Facing the mirror, I could see my entire room in the reflection. There were 3 dark shapes. It was strange that I could see anything at all. Being in the basement, it was almost pitch black at night in my room. It was almost like they wanted to be seen. I was frozen in terror. The figures were completely black, like 3 black holes in the middle of my room. They looked to be hooded, but like any other kid, I closed my eyes and pulled my blanket over my head as soon as I could. I laid there, paralyzed in fear, not making a sound. It was only after my chest burned that I realized I wasn't even breathing. I finally managed to muster up the courage to peek out of the blanket. I let out a huge gasp of air in relief as the mirror revealed an empty room. By this point, my bladder was bursting. I laid there, staring in the mirror for about another 5 minutes, debating if I should risk leaving the protection of my blanket. I couldn't hold it any longer and sat up to get out of bed. There, in the room, the three figures were still right where they had been in the middle of the room, this time casting no reflection. I screamed as loud as I could and clenched my eyes closed. The light came on as my mom rushed into the room. I no longer needed to use the bathroom. My next visit came many years later. I had come home for the summer after my first year of college and was working the late shift at the local Taco Bell. It worked out well, as my parents had gotten an apartment in town to save money, since the rent was cheaper than the gas to get to town every day for work. My step-uncle had since moved out, and my step-grandma worked the midnight shift at the mayor in town. I didn't need to worry about being quiet, coming in at 3 a.m. after my shift. It was only me and the family dog. Taking advantage of being in an apartment, my family had done some remodeling in the basement. They took out that mirrored closet in my room and added more carpet and finishes throughout the basement. It was much more of a living space than just a basement now. The only issue was that they hadn't gotten around to putting a door back on my room. So instead, I just hung a sheet up in the doorway to have at least a bit of privacy. After a long night at work, I got home, took a shower, and was watching some TV before going to bed. As I was lying in bed, I began to get a very uneasy feeling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the sheet hanging in my doorway sway in part to the side. I was annoyed that now that I'm all settled into bed, the dog needs to go out. I got up and walked out and started toward the kitchen door to let the dog out the back. When I exited my room, I didn't see the dog by the door. I looked around and I saw the dog in the corner of the living room, about 20 feet away. She was lying down, staring in my direction, with teeth bared. I called for her to come, but she didn't move. I walked over to pet her and calm her down, but she continued to stare past me, towards the back door. As I turned to see what she was looking at, I saw a shadow move across the kitchen and disappear. I tried to pet her and get her to come with me into my room, but she wouldn't budge. After a few minutes of petting, she finally calmed down and came to bed. I was very glad by this point that it was starting to get light out, and I was finally able to get some sleep. My last and most recent visit is probably the one that freaked me out the most. It seems like whatever these things are, they are getting more confident in showing themselves. This occurred a few years ago, in my own home, across the country from my parents' house where I first began seeing them. I was sleeping in bed with my wife. I woke and I saw a tall hooded figure in the corner of my room next to the dresser. There is a window next to the dresser, and the figure was so dark that it completely blocked the moonlight coming in through the window. It was so solid that I actually thought someone had broken into the house. I threw my pillow at it as a distraction and hopped out of my bed. It must have triggered my fight or flight response. Luckily, it had disappeared as I was about to reach for my gun, thinking it was an intruder. After a few minutes, the adrenaline finally passed, and I was able to relax and get some sleep. The next morning, I went to work and spent most of the day researching shadow people and sleep paralysis, which in retrospect probably was a bad idea. I didn't tell anyone about it. I thought they were for sure just think I was crazy and seeing things. After getting home and having dinner, my wife and I were sitting on the porch having a smoke. She told me she had a strange experience last night. I was completely horrified. She said that she had gotten up to use the bathroom, and when returning to bed, she saw me in the corner waiting for her to finish so I could go. She spoke to it and said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." She then got into bed, rolled over, and I was in bed next to her. I have no idea what these things are, but it worries me that they are getting stronger. The first time it was just me. The next, both me and the dog saw something, and now even my wife saw them. It makes me nervous now that I have young children, as I don't want them to be terrorized by these things like I have throughout my life. If this opens you up to them, I'm sorry. I just had this overwhelming need to share these experiences with someone. So, this is a little paranormal story I had back when I was just 12 years old. During the summer of my 7th grade year, me and my family decided to take a trip up to Alabama to visit my grandfather's estate. My grandfather had just recently passed away due to a massive heart attack, so, unsurprisingly, my family was very distraught. My mother was will executor, so she was in charge of the estate and taking an inventory of all my grandfather's belongings. As we pull up to the house, I get an eerie feeling. To give a little perspective on the setting, I'll describe the house. The house is located in a white trash neighborhood filled with druggies and weirdos. A couple years after the visit, the house would be broken into and the copper from the wiring in the house would be stolen. So that gives kind of an idea of the scumbags my grandfather had living around him. The house itself kind of looked like the house from the Amityville horror movie. It had 3 bedrooms and 2 baths on the top floor, and 1 bedroom and 1 bath in the basement. It had wood floors and the ceiling was unpainted. The only place in the house where the ceilings were somewhat painted was my grandparents' bedroom. It had an X pattern in a sequence of patterns across the ceiling. This bedroom was particularly big and had a bathroom in it. It was also the room where my grandfather died in. My grandfather was 6'7" and 300 pounds, so I guess that was what had attributed to his heart attack. The house's exterior was made of wood and sat on 10 acres of land. Another 100 acres if you count the land that was leased. The land was littered with old rusty cars that my grandfather used to collect parts off of. The inside of the house was rustic, and the furniture looked like it was bought from Goodwill. It smelled musty, a smell I can't really associate with too many other things. Just to be clear, I'm not knocking the house. My grandfather built the house with his bare hands, so I had a lot of respect for it. He and my grandmother had spent the first 3 years building the house, living in the basement. The basement smelled even worse than the upstairs. It smelled like old dead air, the kind of smell you would smell at an abandoned house in the middle of the woods. It had a kitchen, a living area, and a bedroom. I liked to spend a lot of time down there, snooping through the wide variety of items my grandfather had. From old radios to old police monitors, my grandfather had everything down here. On one particular day, my parents were outside taking inventory on the vast collection of mechanic parts, and I was snooping around in the basement. As I was down there, I started to hear noise above my head. It sounded like footsteps coming from my grandparents' room. I figured it was one of my parents in there to get something. I shrugged it off and continued with my snooping. The sounds never went away though. It sounded as if they were walking back and forth. I decided to go up and investigate the noise, but no one was up there. I was creeped out to say the least, so I joined my parents outside where I stayed for the rest of the day. Fast forward to the nighttime, and I was back in the house. I was forced to sleep in my grandparents' bedroom, despite my protest. Luckily, I was sharing the room and the bed with my grandmother, who happened to join my parents on the trip. My parents would sleep across the hall. Me and my mom got in some sort of argument, and I was forced to go to bed early.
I was in this creepy bedroom alone while my grandmother was right outside the bedroom in the living room. She was watching TV. Despite the noise coming from the TV outside the bedroom was extremely quiet. It seemed to take on an aura of its own. The bed faces the door going out to the living room, and the bathroom door sat on the right side of the bed. So here I was in this creepy bedroom, lying on my back in bed. As I was lying there, I began thinking about the footsteps I had heard earlier in the day. I didn't like it in that bedroom. The air inside that room seemed suffocating. As I was lying in the bed, I heard a noise inside the bathroom. I lay there motionless, with my head turned towards the bathroom. My eyes were locked on that closed door. This bathroom wasn't big at all. It was like the size of a storage closet. I will never forget the noise that I was hearing from that bathroom. It sounded like a gargling sound. It sounded like a choking, gargling sound. I can't really explain how scared I was. I just lay there paralyzed with fear. Several seconds went by, although it felt like hours, before the sounds quit. It felt silent again, even more silent than before. I was still too scared to move. I wanted to scream out to my grandma, but I couldn't bring myself to do so. I rolled over on my side so I could permanently keep my eyes on that door. A few minutes went by before I started to notice something again. The door handle on the door was slowly moving from one side to the other, as if someone were trying to open it, but couldn't bring themselves to do so. I just stared in complete horror. My mouth was hanging wide open. The latch on the door went through the stop, and the door began to creep open. It was an inward swinging wood frame door, so it would be opening away from me. As the door began to open, all I could think about was I had to get out of there, but I could never bring myself to do so. The door opened about halfway before it stopped abruptly. It was dark in the room, but the TV from the living room outside illuminated the room a little bit. I could see a dark shadow moving around in the bathroom. I couldn't quite make out the shape of it. It looked eternally dark, sort of like a black hole of darkness. All of a sudden, a face popped out of that darkness. I was horrified. It was my deceased grandmother. Her head and face were showing, but not her body. It was almost as if she were peeking out at me. I was even more weirded out by how close to the floor the head was. It was about an inch underneath the door jamb. Her long mullet-like gray hair hung to the side, and her thick seeing glasses just about covered her whole face. Words can't even begin to describe how terrified I was. I contemplated getting out of bed and running out of the room, but the thought of my grandmother reaching out, grabbing my legs, and pulling me to my doom quickly pushed this thought out of my mind. So I just laid there and stared at her. She stared back at me, and then she began to smile. Oh God, that smile. That smile let me know one thing. That wasn't my grandmother. I don't know who or what that thing was, but it wasn't my grandmother. The smile had dry, caked-on blood surrounding it. It was pure evil. The head began to move its way up, past the door jamb, until it finally stopped at the top of the door, which had to be 7 feet high. Its eyes never leaving mine. It began to creep its way from the side all the way to the middle of the doorway, its dark body just about covering the whole door. I couldn't stand it any longer. I closed my eyes and screamed louder than I had ever screamed before, over and over and over again. Finally, my dad burst through the doorway, followed by my mother and grandmother. A wave of panic filled their face as they flicked on the light and looked at my face. I was pale white and staring into space. They began questioning as to what was wrong, but I said nothing. Eventually, they calmed me down enough where I could finally tell them what happened. They first looked at each other and then back to me. I could tell that they were skeptical, but scared at the same time. My father went and checked out the bathroom. Of course, there was nothing in it. My mother finally moved me out of the room into a different bedroom on the other side of the house. I never heard anything else about this incident from my parents. I'm not even sure if they believed me. All I know is that writing about this 10 years later still gives me the creeps and sends chills down my spine. Probably because of one disturbing fact that I learned a couple years from the incident when the house was finally sold. My grandmother didn't just die. She committed suicide in that very bedroom I was staying in. A gunshot to the chest. I was very close to my grandmother, so I know she wouldn't do anything to scare me like that. So whatever that thing was, I hope I never meet it again. After learning of my grandmother's suicide and that demon I met in her bedroom, I eventually came to a revelation. I believe my grandfather had an unseen factor that contributed to his heart attack. That monster that I encountered in the bedroom is that culprit that had gone unnoticed and ultimately led to my grandfather's demise. What's up, guys? Ghastly Ghoul here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Just to let you know, I'll be retiring the long intro and I'll create another fun but short one for future videos. That way you can get to the stories much faster. I also want to let you know I've been a fan of the horror narrators here on YouTube for about a year now. They're all awesome guys and gals, and they've been great inspirations for me to start my own channel. Please check out my list of subscriptions under my channels tab so you can go visit their channels. They're all very outstanding. If you liked the video, please click the thumbs up button. I'd really appreciate that. Please comment and share. Also, I'd love to assemble a ghastly gang of subscribers. Please consider joining the gang by hitting that subscribe button. I would be honored to narrate your personal true scary stories. You can email them to me at my email address listed below. If you could please just put a short description in the subject line, and also if you could include a statement that you give me permission to narrate your story, that would be great. Also, please follow me on Twitter and like me on Facebook. That way you can keep up to date on what's happening with the channel. The links are below. And now, we must part ways, my friends. You are safe for the time being, but I feel you are living on borrowed time. For you never know what ghastly horrors await you in the vault.